right, Gina. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here at Spotlight.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
Great. For those listeners that don't know you yet, would you mind introducing yourself shortly?
Sure. I'm Gina Clementi. I am the founder of what I have dubbed a deconstructed agency called Goodstory, based in Portland, Oregon.
Right. And what does your agency do?
We work on authentic brand storytelling. What we do is we work with brands that have a story to tell and really uncover what that narrative is and help them connect in a human way with their audience.
Really cool. I also seen you're very active on your Substack. That's why I found your article about the death of the Girlboss era. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. I wrote a little bit about the shift that we're seeing. I think the Girlboss was originally marketed as a rebellion, but in reality, it really functioned as an assimilation. Sophia Amoroso, the CEO of Nasty Gal, had a memoir that really popularized the term for us. And it wasn't really about us dismantling systems. It was more about us fitting into a man's world and mastering them. So succeeding in the same capitalistic structures that excluded women for so long, it wasn't really about us fixing the system. It was about do what men do, but in heels.
Okay, yeah, because you wrote that the girl boss essentially can't be separated from capitalism, right?
Correct.
Which is what you just explained. How did the girl boss narrative ultimately fail women, though, in your opinion?
I think it failed women because it wasn't about us obtaining power and what does that actually mean. It was more about us assimilating to a culture and a system that existed. And I think that when we look at it, there's a lot of things that we were taught in the girl boss era that I think need to be changed and unlearned in a sense. It's not about us leaning in. It's not about us burning out in culture. It's more about us coming in. And this is my opinion now of like, what worked then for Girl Boss was not about dismantling a system and changing it for the better. It was more about how do we insert ourselves in an existing system.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is you're saying not to try to compete or let's say beat the men at the level playing field, but use our complementary skills and lead in a, let's say, female way.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of feminism that we can bring and femininity we can bring into corporate culture. You hear about people like Mark Zuckerberg that talks about how the culture's been neutered, the corporate culture has. And I think he speaks a lot about like that assertiveness and that aggressiveness isn't there anymore. And I don't think we should look at it like that.
Because you worked at some big names like Nike and Adidas, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And did you have a feeling within those cultures that it was like, okay, how can I beat men at their game? Because they are advertising that women's strength and competitiveness and that kind of fiery attitude.
Totally. I left Nike in 2017. And when I left Nike, there was a mass exodus of women that left the brand and a gender discrimination suit that followed afterwards. And so there were moments within that culture that I definitely felt like I had to lean in and I had to push ahead to compete. And I would love to see the narrative shift for women where we stop thinking too around like there's only like certain spots for us at the top. And how do we collaborate and support one another to think about all of the spots at the top are really ready for us. If you look at some of the data too, women are doing really well. Like we're getting advanced degrees and we're topping out, but we're getting to a point within our corporate culture where we're not really like, we kind of peter out a little bit, where you're not seeing a lot of women in a lot of those like CEO roles or you see more women now starting to get some CFO roles and some of that, but it's still not there. So one of the things I keep thinking about too is you start doing a lot of the performative work, you know, people see through it and you start to become resentful. And I was thinking about this time when I was sitting at Nike and I got this email, and this had to be like 2016-ish. And I got this email from the head of HR saying that they had done a pay equity audit. And for every dollar a man made, women made about 97 cents. And I was so pissed off when I got this because I want my 3 cents. And But in the email, and I still have a screen grab of it, it was like men and women are pretty much equal, is basically what it said. And I'm like, no, we're not, because it's still 3 cents less. What kind of came in 2017 after I left is there was a lot of women that left the brand, and apparently there was like a survey that went around asking women how they felt about things. And my understanding is that was really kind of created when women start talking to one another. And they started asking questions about, what are you making, and what am I making, and what is my male counterpart making? And I think that caused a lot of eyes to be opened within the brand for us, that caused and eventually brought up a gender discrimination lawsuit, where after I left the brand, I went through a whole evaluation and started bumping up salaries of some of my former female colleagues, because they were not being paid what men were being paid at the time. And it could be a pretty significant 10,000 plus bump in the salary. So I just remember, and I just think about that email. I still have a screen grab. I keep it. And every once in a while I look at it thinking, no, this is bullshit. I should be making that dollar, not the 97 cents or whatever it was. I want my 3 cents.
Yeah, no, that just shows the power of women's communities as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, if we just started talking to one another and helping one another, I mean, look at the work that can be done. I think it's huge.
Yeah, 100%. Imagine if it were the other way around. Like we made $1.03 versus men's $1. They would be in uproar.
Oh, they would be so pissed. But when I work with women that are entering like the workforce, one of the things I always tell them, because I think that we have been conditioned not to really talk about money, and so we don't compare our salaries. And, when I've mentored younger women and other generations, when they go out job hunting, the one thing I tell them all the time is counter. Like, always counter. Don't be afraid to talk about money. Don't take the first thing that comes to you, because you deserve more. And there's a confidence piece in there of like, men have no problem doing it. We should have no problem doing it. You deserve it. So it's always an eye opener for them. We've been conditioned not to talk about it, but imagine if we did talk about it, how much support we could give one another.
Yeah. And that's also the power of AI nowadays, right? You have access to all the information. I could just ask ChatGPT, like, what does an average so-and-so in my industry make? And I would know. So
yeah, we should absolutely, take a look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, because you definitely highlight that whole backlash to kind of surface level empowerment. Like, hey, let's celebrate International Women's Day. Like, let's put the few women that we have in leadership positions like front and center. Like, look how diverse we are. But, with this intense political pressure, especially in the US, to, roll back the diversity and inclusion programs, how do you think women, especially in mid-level or leadership roles, how should they navigate this without losing hope or burning out, because they're just up there all by themselves?
It's funny that you bring up International Women's Day, because there's a period where I remember when we would try to do stuff to support it. And this is like years ago. And I remember having to convince male leadership it was actually a thing. And they're like, it's not a thing. And then International Women's Day would come up, and then everyone would scramble. So now I look at brands to see like what they're actually doing when they post, to see, which brands are actually backing it up. But to get back to your question, like what we can do, I think there's a lot that we can do. I think there's areas where we need to figure out where we have agency and authority and start influencing that. I think there's areas where we can also work with other women and mentor them, and start to think about how do we deconstruct some of these systems and rebuild them to make them something that's impactful for all women. Just really thinking about like areas where we have that agency, mentorship, hiring decisions, speaking the truth, keep pushing forward. We don't have to do everything all at once either. There's a lot more to be done, and it's going to be a lot of work. For me personally, like what I'm watching now is in the US, I'm watching a lot of brands roll back their DEI programs, and not all of them, but you're seeing a backlash too for the brands that have been doing it. I think the next generation with Gen Z, that they definitely can see when a brand's being authentic, and they want that transparency. And so it's important to make sure that you're putting your money where your values are at too, as a consumer. So
Yeah, good one. Speaking of Gen Z, I interviewed Steph Barney, who is a CEO and co-founder of a community called Girls on the Go, which brings women together in the UK who feel lonely and who want to make friends. So it's really amazing what she's doing. And what she said was she has a feeling that Gen Z is way less about the pay grades and the job titles, and they really are into doing what they enjoy doing, what makes them creative and purpose filled, and just chasing that dream, which I found really beautiful. Have you also seen that change across generations?
Yes, absolutely. I think that they're much better about balance. And I think about where Gen Z is coming from and what they've been through versus like what my generation has been through. You've had a global pandemic, you've had political unrest as well. And so what they've kind of encountered, I think that they've developed, the desire to have a lot more than where, when I started my career, it was like, I was all in, like I was part of it. And I think I leaned in and I did burn out. And it was a tough culture. And I found, especially within my career at Nike, when I left, there was a lot of change going on with the brand because women could only get to a certain level. And they ended up getting to a point where they were sued because of that. And they have made a lot of change within the brand since I've left. I value and I appreciate that Gen Z is really seeking authenticity, and they appreciate more of creating that culture where there is care and thinking about, not just pinkwashing something, but thinking what policy means to them. And they're also really good about taking the rest when needed.
Yeah, I completely
Right.
agree. Yeah, and what I also noticed with Gen Z is that it feels like the power is shifting more towards, creators, those who want to have their voice heard, because now, especially with social media and online platforms evolving as they are, I think if you have a powerful message, if you have something to say, there will be people who are willing to listen.
Yeah, and I think we need to do more of that. I think as marketers that we tend to go in and we can tell people what we think Gen Z wants, but we need to involve them in the conversation and we need to talk to them and we really, really need to listen. And you have to be open too, because you might get some criticism and, you have to be open to hearing that and what that means and how you can actually change. But I think that we do need to listen a lot more and involve them, and not just in content creation, but especially as I look through what's happening in the political structure within the US, the leadership is very, I want to say, outdated. I mean, we need a lot more younger leadership in office, a lot more. We're kind of at that point where I'm excited, I'm hopeful that we can see a lot more younger leaders come to the table because I think they bring a lot.
Yeah. And according to you, feminism isn't over, because you, of course, hear a lot of noise around saying, feminism is going to turn into this femi-Nazi movement. I'm hesitant to take the word into my mouth, to be honest, sometimes. But it's, in your opinion, it's just evolving. What, in your opinion, will that look like in the future workplace?
Sure. I think that we do have a lot more work to do, and we have to also be honest that we haven't fully delivered on the promise. But I don't think the next wave of feminism is around aesthetics, and it's really around fixing systems. And that means like looking at things like pay equity audits, flexible work policies, paid family leave. And that's not just maternity leave. The US is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but there's only a percentage of women that have access to paid family leave. And then you look at other more equitable societies where caregiving is normalized across genders. So when you start to see that happen, men participate more and they understand the women's roles. And then I think there's a shift to the cultural norms. I think we also need to start building leadership that's not, homogenous, and funding women's work. I think there's always a risk of investing in women because people think that we aren't assertive enough or risk-taking enough. I saw a stat somewhere that said only about 4% of venture capital firms invest in women. And that tells me that the number alone, it's not about representation, it's really about investment. And also, I think one other thing, when we think about feminism, we can't just think about how do we help women catch up, but we also have to rethink the culture for everybody. And I think that we also need to do a better job of re-examining how we teach men and boys about power, responsibility, and emotion, and building that EQ knowledge so that they start to view women differently. Because I think that the traditional gender norms also hurt them, and it's going to hurt us having systemic change as well.
Yeah, I was just about to say, when you were saying that, like, how do men fit in the picture? Because of course, the ugly image that feminism has gotten was a lot as well coming from men who said, you complain about us putting you down, but now you want to put us down, kind of thing. That's obviously not what it's about, but how do you involve them in the conversation? Because I know that a lot of men around me already feel that pressure, especially from work, especially from male-only environments at leadership level, where they're like, but if I'm not assertive, if I'm not hard, if I'm not ambitious, then I'm not seen as worthy.
There are shifts happening, and what we haven't done is bring men along with us in that shift. When Kamala lost the election, I was really upset. I went into the coffee shop the next day, and I have a friend that I have coffee with on a regular basis, and we talk about stuff. And he wanted to talk about it, and I was so angry, and I was like, no, not today, not today. And we did talk about it, but what he was trying to tell me the day after was that we failed men. And I was like, well, what does that actually mean? And as much as that kind of makes you want to roll your eyes, you know, they haven't been taught, some of these generations haven't been taught how to communicate, how to develop that strong emotional intelligence. And so how do we start to think about how do we bring them along the journey? And I think that's what my friend was trying to say, is like, he goes, you forgot men in the messaging. And he was right. We didn't bring him along in that way. And so I think if we're really going to shift culture, we have to start by teaching them differently. I just kept thinking about this like video of little boys and running like a girl. And they talk about what does that mean? And they ask the little boys and they ask the little girls, and how innocent it was, their response. But at some point that changes, where it becomes like, oh, you run like a girl becomes like an insult. Fighting like a girl becomes an insult. You know, how do we change that so they see it differently? We're different, but we're also strong, and we take risks, and we can be assertive.
Yeah, it's all about knowing when to do which, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what I hope at least is there will be a snowball effect, because once we start having these conversations with, you know, our peers, with our colleagues, and then with our partners as well, the more that the next generation will see them as role models, will see that behavior modeled in front of them by their fathers, by their mentors, by their teachers. And then, you know, gradually that'll be the new reality. At least I hope, because my partner, he grew up in a family where his dad was taking pretty much 50% of the caretaking of the children. He worked one day less per week to be with the kids.
That's cool.
You know, he was one of the first of his generation, right? He was a teacher, and he said, you know, he was already working in a quite female-dominated environment, but he said no other male teachers were doing this, and they were all, oh, a daddy day, like who does that? And he was like, but it was important to me. And so my partner did exactly the same when I had my two kids. He wanted to have a day off to spend with them. So, you know, that's the behavior that gets perpetuated. Yeah.
Yeah, it means a lot. I've written about some other things too, and the response I get sometimes from men is really impressive. Like, they realize the power that we have if we can change that narrative for their daughters, make a better life for their daughters to be able to grow and succeed. And I just think we just need to redefine what success means for us and what it really means as a woman to have that power. It's not about us having to lean in. We don't have to be men.
Yeah. It's definitely not a competition, because there are no winners or losers in this. That's it in terms of the questions that I had written down. Was there anything else that you wanted to add from your side?
One thing I have to say is I have seen some progress, and I'm really excited to see what's going to happen next, because like I said, feminism isn't over, but I do think that the girl boss era, that we need to move forward from it, and it served its purpose. Let's put it to bed and start thinking about now, how do we support and collaborate with one another to really create systemic change within the corporate world? And then where are those opportunities for us to also speak out with brands that aren't serving us? That be using our voice, and it's also using our wallets too when needed. I mean, if you look at like a Target right now, they've taken a hit from the DEI backlash. There's opportunity for us.
Yeah, that's a really nice perspective. I feel like we as consumers often feel very powerless when it comes to these kinds of things like policy and politics. But yeah, actually with our wallets, we can make quite a few changes, like you mentioned.
I think we as other generations outside of Gen Z, there's opportunity to be fully transparent as well as we go along, like call bullshit when there's bullshit to be called. If something is just being pinkwashed, then, you know, be fully upfront with the teams that we're leading. Let's mentor them. Let's talk to them. Let's understand their pain points. Let's understand what matters to them. Let's also talk to them about stuff that we have learned along the way.
100%. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much. You ended it on a very optimistic note. I'm glad.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you.